on to the high-level panel, Anis Berthet, Anders Lund, and then we have François Dijon joining us up here. So, let's see. There you are. Excellent. I'll just start to say a few words while you come up here. Now we heard from Lars Aagaard. Well, as I tried to conclude at the end, it seems to be 50-50 with regards to having a 2040 deal. It was also very interesting to hear about the six-pack, the six different dimension of climate policy. It was also very clear that climate is now only one of sort of the aspects of the policy that we have to pursue. Lars Aagaard clearly highlighted how it was difficult to get the support of the far right, and through that, in regards to the far right, then it's probably also the right and maybe also the center right, because there is this danger that the far right will gain many votes in the elections coming up. I'll just introduce my wonderful panel, color-coordinated Anis Berthet, and you are head of Client Earth Brussels in Brussels. That's an international not-for-profit that takes governments to court for failing to live up to their climate obligations. Sounds very interesting. Anis, welcome. We have Anders Lund, who is CEO at the Danish company and leading biosolutions producer. And the company is pronounced?
Novonesis.
Yes, but that was not what your colleague said on television last night. That from America, that made me sort of very confused. Eva Jensen knows everything about climate change and also about COP negotiations. I'm dying to ask you what you think about what you just heard. But today you are head of climate at the European Climate Environmental Agency here in Copenhagen. And François Dijon, you are head of the Secretariat of the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. Hope I got that right. And I'll start, François, with asking you, how is the picture at the moment with regards to climate change? I mean, we heard from the president that it's definitely not going in the right way. But how do you look upon it also when you studied at your secretariat? And thank you so much for being here.
Sure, thank you for the invitation. The first thing we can see is that climate change is present with us, and the summer is just behind us, and the climate events of the summer are fresh in our memories, even though they were not really something we can call fresh. We have seen recent estimates of the economic losses of these summer events amounting to more than 43 billion euros. And that's economists from the European Central Bank and the University of Mannheim that have put that figure. Today, the European Environment Agency also is giving figures on climate events over the last 3 years, more than 160 billion euros. 2024 was the warmest year on record, and Europe is the warmest climate, the fastest warming continent. So we are all seeing the impact of climate change. We are all feeling climate change, and that's a call for action. And that's a call for ambition and a call to deliver on the targets that we have committed to already. We talk a lot about the NDC, we talk a lot about 2040. This is not about the next target. The next target has already been agreed. It's climate neutrality by 2050. It's net negative emissions after that. And so it's about how do we get there and what would be a milestone to get there, 2040, 2035. But that keeps us on track to go to climate neutrality by 2050. And
are we on track?
Are we on track? I don't know if Eva wants to respond to that question.
She's very eager to answer that question. So, Eva, are we on track?
We are largely on track. We are down 37%, and in the projections, it looks like we are almost there. So, with a bit of extra effort, we will get there, as we have done every time we set a target in the EU. And when we set a new target in the EU, we also always tend to think, oh, that looks really, really difficult. And reality is, when we get closer, we tend to say, okay, we are actually there, it's okay.
And the discussion you just heard about 2040, what are your conclusions with regards to that, finding a new balance and so forth, the reality game, I'm just quoting?
I think we all understand that we are in a very difficult political situation at the moment, and therefore it is important to understand that there's a lot of the mental space and political space that are crowding out the climate discussions. But reality is also that the climate discussions are weaved into all the other important discussions at the moment, and therefore taking it aside doesn't make any sense. I think security is probably what is the main issue at the moment, and one of our biggest security issues are energy, and we saw it during COVID, what happened then. And the other one is climate change. So we see climate change happening, and it's becoming an increasing real security issue for us. The other big one is the economy, fairness, and the understanding that doing what we need to do for climate change is not necessarily a social problem for us. There is a way to do it where we can end in a very fair and solidaric economy and fixing climate change at the same time.
And the overall sort of goal, I guess one can say that the EU has had for many years, so to be first mover, then also its climate leadership, be able to coming out with ambitious targets, and then making sure that others would follow. Is that completely gone, or what? Because it seemed as if this was no longer so much our ambition. We had to balance, we had to make sure not going too far, and we also had Europe being making up a much smaller part of the world. I mean, how do you look upon that?
I think the way we hear the minister that just spoke, Lars, but also others, is that no, we are still there, but we are looking at the enablers. And it's always the same discussion we have. It's like, okay, do we agree on a target first? And then how do we do it? And it is this dance that we do every time. And in a way, you understand why member states would think, I would like to know how I'm going to do it before I say yes to the target.
And meet the voters, yeah.
And meet the voters. On the other hand, we need the target now for the COP. And in a way, it's a bit like a bidding contest. And you get more out of your number the sooner you come with it. Because what you want, and it was very clear if you listen to both Bolesta and Lars, what they say is, I only want to do this if the others are doing something similar. And I don't think what the others are doing are similar. And therefore, it has a higher value the sooner you bring it out, because then you can use it to leverage the other countries.
And are we doing that now?
I hope you're getting there soonish.
Okay, we're getting there soonish. Okay, that's good. Let's move on to you, Anis. Let's just have a short sort of discussion about Ursula von der Leyen 1.0. How do you see that has developed? What did the Commission get right? Where would you say that there was room for improvement?
Sure. First,
thanks for being here. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here today. Can I as well just react shortly to what's been
said
before? Because I think we need to remember why we are addressing or attempting to address the triple crisis. It's also to make sure that we leave an inhabitable planet to our children and the children of our children. And so that is why decision makers should sometimes feel guilty and realize that the situation we're in and the numbers speaks from themselves. The 2040 target is not only a number, it shows the level of ambition that the EU will have in addressing the climate crisis and the triple crisis, not only the climate crisis. And exactly determine the extent to which the EU will play a leadership role at global level and for the decade to come. And it's surprising because the failure of the EU to set that target happens really almost exactly 2 months after the International Court of Justice has adopted its advisory opinion that clarifies actually that it is a legally binding obligation to submit NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And it goes further in clarifying the obligation of the states, which means that actually the content of the NDCs must reflect the highest ambition possible and remind that the target is still the 1.5 degrees, the legally binding target under the Paris Agreement. And that failure to do so may account to a breach of international law, so that the content of the NDCs are now subject to judges' scrutiny. So I think that's interesting to remember. And
So you're taking them to
well, I think that what it means that, of course, it can lead to increased litigation, and that is exactly the legal risks that the states and that the companies are taking by not addressing the triple crisis. It's also linked to the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights, the Klima Signorinen case, in which the European Court, so I don't know if everybody is naive, I don't know if the judges of the International Court of Justice are naive, or if the judges of the European Court of Human Rights are naive, but they also clarified that there was a right to effective protection by public authorities from the serious effects of climate change, and that Switzerland at the time actually was in breach of its duties exactly for not adopting relevant climate target and for not having put in place the relevant administrative and legal frameworks in place. But so what was the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package doing was actually adopting a real transformative agenda, right? It was the first time that sustainability, the environment, was so high up in the political agenda, and placed the EU in a leadership role at global level. And so it was possible. Yes, the geopolitical context has changed, but it depends what measure we put in place to address the triple crisis. So not only the number of initiatives, legislative and policy, were impressive, but it was also having a holistic approach. You see it, for example, with the adoption of the CSDDD or the Farm to Fork strategy. The CSDDD was the first piece of legislation at EU level, finally requiring companies to identify, assess, and mitigate the impact their economic activities have on human rights and the environment throughout the value chain. And I think we need to save the CSDDD. We need to make sure that the industry do adopt climate transition plan. But maybe I'll get to
surely the various legislation you mentioned were also legislation that sort of led to a pushback in many countries with regards to climate change. Particularly if you again look at the far right and the center right.
Yes, of course. The pushback started around the adoption of the nature restoration law, actually.
Yeah.
With the farmers' protests and to some extent with the instrumentalization of the farmers' protest. And I think we need to reject outright the dichotomy, the false dichotomy that has been kind of thought at the time, which consists in opposing, on the one hand, agriculture, for example, or sustainability issues, or addressing the climate crisis, and competitiveness and security on the other hand. It doesn't work like that. It is a losing game. And what the EU is doing right now is actually setting a race to the bottom, wanting to compete with the US and China, when I don't agree with what's been said before. China is actually becoming the new leader. So it's not that they are not doing anything and that we don't want to lead anymore. We are losing the lead, at least the EU is losing the leadership, and others are taking advantage of it. And so, so this dichotomy must be rejected. And it's troubling to hear some of the decision makers, like this morning, speaking about competitiveness and what the industry needs, when we hear calls from a representative of the industry actually calling for the EU not to revise for example, the CSDDD, or to adopt an ambition 2040 climate target. So there was a call from 150 CEOs, actually, that signed a letter calling upon the European Commission, the members of the European Parliament, and the Council for them to adopt an ambitious 2040 target at least 90%. And they were really clear about the fact. So you had Allianz, Unilever, Iberdrola, Engie, EDF, IKEA, Schneider Electric. And their message was that they need a strong science-based target to give them the confidence to plan, invest, and innovate. And you hear lots of these calls. Another call in France as well called Let's Not Be Afraid, saying that weakening the goal would actually erode sovereignty and undermine investments. And them explaining the fact that ambition is not a burden for competitiveness. On the contrary, it is the foundation of it.
That was a brilliant segue to you, Anders. Sort of, let's start with, I would say, how you look upon the Ursula 1.0 Commission and how that sort of influenced your work, and then we'll get back to the excellent question here of whether you would also like to have these sort of very clear science-based targets and what kind of role that will play. But let's start by looking back at the 1.0 Commission.
So I think, first of all, we share the ambition that the world needs to do something. Business needs to do something, and I actually think we're doing our part. This is our generation's largest challenge. And the question is, how do you then do it? By solely looking at climate, that's, in our view, not the solution. I think if we do that, actually we'll end up in a much worse position in Europe, given the fact that all the goodwill and power that we've seen build up from a policies standpoint will actually lose its weight. And that means that we will enter a different world, one where we probably get even more protectors of our own competitive world, and I think that's not the way to move forward. So a much more balanced approach, where you find a way to actually stay competitive as Europe. That is a lot to do with energy. We are really not favored from an energy standpoint in Europe. And the reality is many businesses, at least the global ones, they will not necessarily care where to put their production assets. They will put them where they can actually make the most money. And the reality is, if that's not Europe, well, then you'll have investments moving outside of Europe. And that's, I think, what's going on right now. We can clearly see it's much more advantageous to us to build in the US, to build in India, simply out of the fact that energy prices are lower, raw material prices are lower. And then if you add on that one way of 1.0, as you call it, Ursula von der Leyen, sort of wants to regulate their way into this. Then you end up in a situation where then regulation is also really slow and very long in Europe. And again, it means we will not invest innovation resources here because the market just takes too long. And that's some of the things where I think now the new way of looking at it is much more balanced. We need to accept that dealing with climate change has to go hand in hand with growth, economic development. If we don't have that, I'm pretty sure the EU would lose all of its ambitions and also political will to deliver those ambitions.
So you support all the sort of deregulation that we're hearing about now, and simplification, omnibus, sustainability package, and so forth, because that would make it more realistic for you to stay?
Absolutely, 100%. Just a few examples.
Yeah.
Just a few examples of what it means. If you want a novel agriculture solution that actually can reduce chemicals to have its way into Europe, it takes 8-9 years to get it registered. In the US, they can do it in 2-3 years. If you want a novel protein that can actually challenge the consumption of meat because you can make plant-based meat taste much better, it takes months in the US, it takes 2 to 3 years in Europe. The reality of that is that when you start to invest, what market do you want to invest in? You want to invest in the market where it moves fast. And that is just not Europe right now. We see it the same with China, with India, with Latin America. They are just moving faster than we are in Europe. So if we don't change that, investments will move out of Europe very quickly. And I think that's already what we see right now. So challenging that and just getting to equal terms on speed, I think, is a prerequisite for the competitiveness of Europe. That does not mean that regulation is bad. Actually, you can do a lot of good things with regulation. You can strategically move industries into areas where you want them to develop. You want businesses to invest. It just needs to be at a different level of speed. Because every time we are 2-3 times slower, well, why then bother investing in Europe?
François, I need your help. Because I'm hearing all this about sort of finding the right balance and also reality game, and I hear about a six-pack. So I don't hear that much about climate and climate targets in the long term, or the importance, as also the president at the beginning highlighted, the importance that we actually pursue climate-based policy, because that is more important than ever. So is there a danger that climate is being squeezed out? Very leading question, sorry.
As I said in my first statement, climate is not going out of our realities. So it has also climate policies, and climate response has to be in our realities. Climate adaptation, of course, if we want to limit the damage.
That, yeah.
We want to limit the damages and the losses due to climate change. But of course, we don't want to be taking the water out of the bathtub while at the same time not turning the tap off. And so we need to reduce emissions. And to do that, we need to do that in line with the commitments under the Paris Agreement. So let's take also a step back about how do we get there? The European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change looked into more than 1,000 climate neutrality pathways for Europe, coherent with both 1.5 degrees and climate neutrality. And this is where, by looking at the most realistic scenarios, the most feasible scenarios, but also ambitious scenarios, they came up with this recommendation of a reduction from 90 to 95% by 2040. That should be the needle on our compass. This is what science requires. And then, of course, we can discuss how to get there, and we can do that in a lot of different ways. But there is one invariable, which is the climate that is happening and the need to cut emissions down. And that's what should guide the discussions on the policies. Rather, I would say that the other way around. We need to know what those policies that we're discussing aim at, and what is the overall level that they should achieve. And from there, once you have that clarity, you give visibility, credibility, and trust to investors that this is the way that we're going to. This is where we're going to go, and this is where you need to invest. And you give the policymakers a framework where they can actually discuss the details of what should the next EU climate architecture be.
And if there's no 2040 target, what then?
Well, we can only rely then on what we have, which is a 2030 target and a 2050 target. So there's a big gap and a lot of uncertainty that is not good for the business either. The business needs to know where we're heading. Because investment decisions are long-term decisions. And so this is where we have to have as much credibility, as much clarity on our trajectory towards climate neutrality.
So let's be very concrete here. If Lars Aagaard doesn't manage to have an agreement on 2040 goal, does that influence your company?
First, let me say, I think it would be sad if we don't have a commitment by 2040. It's important, I also think, to stress that actually a lot of businesses take a lot of responsibility here. What we're doing on our own behalf is that we're actually cutting emissions faster than what any country is doing in Europe. We have managed to reduce our own scope 1 and 2 emissions by 65% when we move out of this year versus 2018, and that encompasses all the growth we've had in the same period. We are now, as we end this year, 100% renewable on everything we buy on energy. So businesses can do their part, and I think a lot of businesses are actually doing that. When it then comes to the speed, I also want to comment that the predictability of regulation is going to be incredibly important for businesses also to stay, because uncertainties around that is just poison for investment decisions that you have as a business. So from that perspective, we support that move into predictability and speed.
Would you like to help me?
Yeah.
No. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to, create a six-pack for me. That's too many points. But when we constantly speak about the balance, I mean, what sort of at least one element should be in this six-pack? Because you don't have to do six.
I'm picking up also Anders' energy.
Allowed to do that, yeah.
Because I think it's an important point, and it's something that we hear a lot at the moment. And you also said Europe was not fortunate on energy, and that is the case. So the only way Europe can have cheap energy is to have renewable energy. And that is where we are going. And as I hear you already there, you are totally on renewable energy. So, of course, renewable energy and transforming our energy system into a fully renewable energy system is the only way to have cheap energy. So that's one of my 6 pack. I'm not sure I'll get to 6, but I'll try.
No, you don't have to.
It's very obvious when you do analysis that you need a carbon price, and you need a carbon price for most of the system. So that would be number 2. And we do already have quite a bit of carbon prices in the EU, but we might want to benefit from having a look at the rest of the sectors. We also see that the sector who have had a carbon price the longest are the one that has reduced the most. There's areas where it's more difficult with a price. One of them being grid, and we need to look at the grid. Electrification is an important part of it, so I would say grid. And then flexibility between and integration between the mobility system, energy system, and so forth is also one of them. Then we have a sector where you can always discuss what hard to abate is, but if it's prices, it might not be the one. But if you look into what is the technology we know, then the agricultural sector is probably still an area where you would say it's hard to abate. So how do we make sure that the agricultural sector is part of it? Because they still consist of quite a few emissions, but also at the same time, they will be central in when we, as Francois said earlier, are going neutral and going net zero, below net zero later on. So to exercise the technology of that. And that was a 5-pack, and I think that's it.
That's it, okay, that's fine. Any contributions, any sort of add-ons to the...
Okay, let's just pick up on agriculture, because I think that's just a great example. We want to decarbonize agriculture, and then we take 9 years to actually approve solutions for Europe that could do just that. You could reduce the chemical load substantially in agriculture, and we're just sitting and waiting. It's one of those fundamental issues that we do not have a science-based approach to what would really matter to make this transition. So we just end up in bureaucracy waiting for the right decisions to be made. Eventually they'll get there. It's just maybe 7 years too late.
But what about the EU's industrial policy? Is that also part of this?
I believe it is. I believe part of the
There are a few words about that.
Part of the deregulation that you are now with Omnibus and also challenge the CSRD and so on has to do with business policies in Europe, trying to make it much more flexible. With the logic, which is maybe a little bit sad, but the logic is that the current governments will lose power if they just keep on not accepting that. When people start losing their jobs, this is where this will end. So we need economic growth to actually deliver that transition, as we said. And I think that's where the balanced approach is absolutely required to move forward.
Because you may not be representative of the whole, of course, the whole industry.
I don't think I've said that. No.
No, you haven't said that. But about the simplification agenda, and you call it deregulation, and you're right about that, because it is not about cutting red tape and reducing bureaucracy, like it's been said, for example, in the speech on the State of the Union. I think nobody would be against simplification, right? It is a full and unprecedented deregulation agenda that actually consists in dismantling the regulatory framework that has been put in place under the previous mandate, under the European Green Deal, and more concerning, even potentially weakening some of environmental legislation that have been adopted even before. So we don't know yet. There is an environment omnibus coming up. We are discussing it with the commissioner in a high-level dialogue that has replaced public consultation on Thursday. But yeah, so that is really concerning because these laws, the law has a role to play in society. And these laws have been adopted to actually protect all of us, the people, the environment, but also businesses, and to provide that legal clarity that the business need to plan and to innovate. So of course, there are ways to make the regulatory framework more efficient, but it's not amending the EU legislative framework. We think it should be done more at a technical level, more at national level. For example, increasing funding and also capacity for national authorities who are responsible for implementing and enforcing European environmental legislation on the ground. There are some lack of know-how, filling the digitalization gap, for example, for permitting processes when it comes to environmental impact assessment, and to reduce the delays on the ground. So yes, there are ways to make the regulatory framework more efficient, but we don't think it is in dismantling the whole bulk of EU environmental legislation.
And that is your fear, I mean, that you have a baby.
It is. I mean, if you look, yeah, of course, if you look at the CSDDD, nobody can say it's only simplification. It is the regulation. If you look at the revision of the CAP just before the new mandate, under an emergency procedure, it is the regulation, it is not simplification. If you look at the chemical omnibus that is coming up with potentially the possibility to reintegrate carcinogenic substances in cosmetics. Okay, we can call it simplification, but I mean, do we really want that kind of simplification?
So what would you call it? Dismantling, or what?
Dismantling, weakening environmental legislation, and weakening the protection that has been put in place to also protect us and public health.
You had a comment?
Yeah, we're in a new policy term that started in December last year with the new Commission, or a year ago with the new Parliament. And I think all policymakers have taken note of the new political realities that we're in, and the Commission has reframed climate policies in the broader context of competitiveness and security. I think this is the right framing. As you said, we can't have just climate alone. We can't do things only for climate's sake. We have to do it also to benefit Europe's citizens and companies. And I think the good news is that it goes well together. Climate action and competitiveness. If you cut your energy dependency on fossil fuel imports, then if you electrify, modernize your grids, and go toward renewables that are cheaper and cheaper, then it's good. It's also good for the European competitiveness and European economy. If you have an infrastructure that is more climate resilient, more prepared to climate risk, that's also protecting Europe and its competitiveness, and also protecting its security. So we have a good case to make for climate action that also supports competitiveness. There's of course the risk of going to deregulation if you talk about simplification, but overall I think this is the right framing, and it's now for Europe, for the Commission, and for the countries to boost what are the industries of the future. And I think talking about
Back to industrial policy, I presume.
yeah, talking about lead markets, making sure that clean tech is supported as it should, supporting innovation much more than we have done so far. I think there's still a bit of gap on innovation and early market development, where we need to make much more effort. I think this is where we should really focus our efforts, because that will be building a robust and competitive economy that can face that can be competitive on the world scene and try to compete with the global partners.
So a green industrial policy also partly financed over the EU budget. Is that what you see in your crystal ball?
By the EU budget, we have also revenues from the EU ETS. We still have a massive subsidy to fossil energy, and we've been way too slow in cutting down those fossil fuel subsidies. So if you just take the mass of these fossil fuel subsidies, of course it's not simple. You can't just say we reallocate them directly, but you could still generate some fiscal space by reducing those subsidies, and they can help both supporting innovation. They can also help vulnerable companies and households that are going to be affected in one way or another by the transition.
And ETS2, sort of with citizens fearing that it will affect their housing. the price of the housing. I mean, you just said that things go hand in hand. I'm now representative of a far-right party. I would definitely not agree with you.
Well, pricing has been by far a very efficient policy instrument, carbon pricing. So of course it's complex. It's a complex picture, and we need to make sure that the framing condition for putting a price on carbon are there. Whether we talk about ETS 1, ETS 2, transport and household, or even putting a price on agriculture emissions, which is what Denmark has been a pioneer in. But of course, it is something that has to be done at the right pace and in the right conditions. But I think it sets the direction to go. And when I say I think, I'm rather referring to the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change, because this is one of their messages.
Okay. Let's now turn to the Danish EU presidency. It is ending, as we all know, on the 1st of January next year. When will it have been a success? When will you be sitting, having your Christmas glück, saying this was really a successful presidency, or maybe sort of kind of like one sort of being 50-50, whatever? Eva.
I'm not sure that I'm the right one to decide
well, you have the floor.
I can.
You're on the spot.
I think we would probably all agree, and I haven't heard anyone say otherwise, that we would like our climate targets to be in line with what science are telling us, and also what the Paris Agreement is reflecting.
People are nodding, so yeah, okay, good.
Is Christian also nodding? And I don't think anyone, especially the Danish presidency, and I think Lars said it quite clearly also, like he's the moderator, but unfortunately he don't get to decide. So I think the moderator would be happy if he can go to the COP with an NDC and a 2040 target that are in line with science and the Paris Agreement.
And for people not following this all their time, what would it actually mean if the EU arrives without an NDC?
But it would mean, as I said beforehand, that you've already heard the two gentlemen who spoke in the beginning saying that I'm not going to do a lot if the others are not going to do a lot.
I mean, so, not the gentlemen, I mean,
Lars and
of CBS.
Yeah. So the two ministers saying like, it's about what the others are doing. I need to be able to defend this to my home base. I need to be able to defend that this is fair. And therefore, if they go to the COP without an NDC that reflects the Paris Agreement, it will be very, very difficult for the others to go home and say what we are bringing is at the same ambition level. And that is how it works. It is because we all need to say, okay, this is fair in the context of, and there are so many parameters on how rich are we and what did we do in the past and so on. So it doesn't necessarily have one sharp number, but I think we all have a pretty good idea of whether we are within the Paris Agreement. And what I hear people saying is that what they need to be able to do that is enabling factors. So are we not, and the issue is that's not something the Danes have any opportunity to fix before Christmas and the glück. It will be for the Commission to propose. But of course, one can have a conversation about what is important for us and how can we make sure that the important part of the enablers are at least discussed between the member states before then.
Annelies, do you have a comment on the presidency or the topic that we just discussed?
Well, by the end of the year, we will have the REACH proposal as well, since we need to have a holistic view. So it's not only about the 2040 target, but how we reach that target as well. And so that would be nice if the deregulation wave was a bit put on with a break, as well as the chemical omnibus, of course, and the environment omnibus. But of course, also the elephant in the room is the agricultural sector, and the CAP reform is engaged. And so it is really of paramount importance that this sector finally contributes as well to addressing the climate crisis and reduce drastically their methane emissions, which are way more toxic than the CO2 emission, and to move from an intensive farming to extensive livestock model. So that would be nice to see that supported by the Council and by the European Parliament, since there is some wording in the Commission's proposal around that as well.
I'd like to add specifically for our industry, a bold and ambitious Biotech Act would make a difference. Again, if you look at Europe, there are industries we've lost solar and we've lost batteries to China. This is an opportunity for us to actually gain leadership within and contain the leadership we have within biotech in general. We need to have that deregulated, but we need to have it ambitious. And with ambitious, I mean trying to understand what technologies are actually available today, which are better than the ones that we are sort of currently using. And with biosolutions in general, we can actually create a lot of growth. There's a recent report coming out saying that we can develop 135 billion in revenues for Europe if we did it right. That will also create 650,000 jobs across Europe. Policies like that will actually make us stay competitive in the areas that are really important to Europe. And here we believe, clearly also coming from the industry, that biosolutions and biotech in general is something we need to protect.
And there's still a chance for that, undoubtedly.
I think so.
Is that remember?
Maybe just to build on that, because we're talking about agriculture, and agriculture is a key land activity. And agriculture also has a key role to play in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. And I think it's when you look at today's trends of the European carbon sinks from both forest but also land in general, we have some worrying trends, and we can be concerned that if overall we're on track to meet our 2030 target on the land side, on the negative emission side, there are more reasons for concern. And it's fair to say countries yet haven't found really the solution to preserve those carbon sinks. So there's need to be much more decisive action from policymakers. And one way to do that could be actually to reward better removals from the land sector. So removals from forest, but also removals from farmers. So we have this carbon farming idea and carbon farming certification framework, where the idea would be to give money for those landowners that are able to capture and stock carbon from the atmosphere. I think this is something that is really vital for a future EU climate framework, and it needs to be much more emphasized and strengthened. And there's a certain potential for carbon removals from land. There's also certain potential from other types of carbon removals that are today not well developed and not cost effective, and that they have to become cost efficient. And just like renewables costs have really dropped over the last decades, I think we can make a lot of progress on making those technological removals much more cost efficient, and they will be necessary not to compensate only emissions from residual emissions, but again, because science tells us that it's not about just net zero, it's about net negative emissions. We're already at 1.3, 1.4 degrees. We will get above 1.5 degree, but it's a long-term objective. So there will have to be a bit of overshoot for global temperatures, but we will have to bring temperatures down with negative emissions. And that's the importance of the land sector, of preserving our carbon sinks, and also of supporting technological removal.
We are approaching coffee, which is important, not Glück, it's too early for that. We have now sort of agreed up here that we should stick to the targets. We have also agreed that we should strike a balance. So now you have the turbo round, so basically where you could say, okay, what is then most important in order for us to strike this balance? Green industrial policy.
The Biotech Act, deregulation, and cheap energy.
Targets, electrification, investment, and infrastructure.
Having an evidence and science-based decision-making process and respecting democratic safeguards when decisions are made, because that's a really important point that we haven't touched upon. But the way the decisions are made are as concerning as the decisions themselves.
Thank you for highlighting that as well. It's been such a wonderful panel.